Heartbreak doesn't just shatter your soul, it completely empties your bank account. Clara sat in a dimly lit Chicago lounge, clutching a glass of cheap bourbon, desperately trying to drown the reality of her ruined life. She was overweight, entirely broke, and utterly alone. Or so she thought. Up in the VIP booth, shrouded in velvet shadows, a ruthless syndicate boss watched her every move mesmerized. Her nightmare was ending, but a much more dangerous game was just beginning. She sat hunched over the polished mahogany bar, her full heavy figure clad in a dark green wrap dress that felt entirely too tight tonight. For the past 3 months, food had been her only comfort, adding an extra 20 pounds to her already plus-size frame. She didn't care anymore. The soft curve of her stomach, the thick lines of her thighs. They were just physical manifestations of the emotional armor she was trying to build against a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. Clara stared down into her glass of well whiskey, watching the ice melt into a watery, pathetic puddle. She was 28, an auditor for the prestigious accounting firm Deloitte, yet she had been stupid enough to let a man destroy her life. Brandon Pierce. Just thinking his name made her chest tighten, with a suffocating mix of rage and profound shame. Brandon had been charming, handsome, and seemingly completely in love with her. He had made her feel beautiful, constantly praising her lush curves, telling her she was a goddess when society told her she was too fat. It was all a calculated lie. Once he had her completely under his spell, he convinced her to co-sign a massive business loan through Chase Bank for his tech startup. He had forged documents, drained her personal savings, maxed out 3 of her credit cards, and vanished into thin air. Now Clara was staring down the barrel of $150,000 in debt. The eviction notices from her landlord at Cushman & Wakefield were piling up on her kitchen counter. Her life was a complete, unmitigated disaster, and she had nobody to blame but herself. She took another burning sip of the whiskey, a rogue tear escaping her lashes and carving a track down her flushed, rounded cheek. She swiped it away angrily with the back of her hand. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry tonight. Tonight was just for numbing the pain. High above the main floor, behind a pane of one-way glass in the exclusive VIP section, Vincent Moretti sat in total silence. Vincent was a ghost in the Chicago underworld, the undisputed head of the Moretti crime syndicate. At 34, he possessed a lethal kind of elegance, sharp jawline, cold slate-gray eyes, and a tailored Brioni suit that concealed the violent nature of his daily life. The room around him was filled with the low murmurs of his top lieutenants, discussing union kickbacks and port smuggling routes, but Vincent wasn't listening to a word they were saying. His piercing gaze was locked onto the woman sitting alone at the bar down below. "Boss, the shipment from Miami gets here Tuesday," Leo, his underboss, muttered, tapping a cigar against a crystal ashtray. "If the feds are watching the docks, we might need to reroute through the Cicero warehouse." Vincent raised a single finger, silencing Leo instantly. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the glass overlooking the lounge. He had been watching the woman in the green dress for the better part of an hour. In a club packed with artificial, perfectly sculpted socialites, starving themselves for attention, there was something incredibly arresting about her. She was undeniably full-figured, her thick, gorgeous curves spilling softly against the bar stool, her dark hair cascading in messy waves down her back. But it wasn't just her body that held his attention. It was her absolute, crushing sorrow. Vincent lived in a world built on deception, where smiles were weapons and laughter was a negotiation tactic. The raw, unfiltered agony radiating from this woman was the most honest thing he had seen in years. He watched as she took another drink, her plump lips trembling slightly before she squeezed her eyes shut. A strange, unfamiliar protectiveness flared in his chest. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But looking at her soft, vulnerable form, he felt an overwhelming urge to shield her from whatever demons were tearing her apart. "Who is she?" Vincent asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded absolute obedience. Leo blinked, following Vincent's gaze down to the bar. He frowned, clearly confused by his boss's sudden interest in a crying, overweight woman drinking cheap liquor. "Nobody I recognize, boss. Not a regular. Want me to have security run her ID from the door, no?" Vincent replied softly, his eyes tracing the delicate slope of her neck as she turned to order another drink. "Leave her alone. Just make sure nobody bothers her." Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his own glass of Macallan 18. He should have been focusing on the incoming shipment, on the millions of dollars moving through his territory. Instead, he was captivated by a stranger. He watched the bartender slide another drink toward her, noticing the way her shoulders slumped, as if she were carrying the weight of the entire city on her back. Vincent had built his empire by exploiting weaknesses, but looking at her, he only wanted to heal hers. He just didn't realize yet that the universe had a dark sense of humor, and their lives were already tangled together in a web of stolen money and inevitable violence. Hours slipped by, and Clara's tab grew right alongside her numbness. The edges of the velvet room were beginning to blur the smooth jazz music, warping into a heavy rhythmic thrumming in her ears. She knew she should go home to her empty half-packed apartment, but the thought of facing those cardboard boxes made her feel physically sick. Suddenly, the heavy scent of cheap cologne and stale beer invaded her space. A tall, aggressively confident man wearing an unbuttoned dress shirt slid into the empty stool beside her. He had the arrogant sneer of a mid-level corporate drone who thought buying bottle service made him a king. "A little late for a girl to be drinking all alone, isn't it?" The man slurred, leaning in entirely too close. Clara stiffened, pulling her heavy coat tighter around her full figure. "I prefer to be alone, actually." "Have a good night." The man scoffed, his eyes sweeping over her body with blatant disgust, mixed with predatory amusement. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't play hard to get. Guys like me are doing girls like you a favor by even saying hello. A big girl like you should be grateful for the attention." The cruel words felt like a physical blow, hitting Clara squarely in her deepest insecurities. Brandon's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of her flaws, telling her nobody else would ever want her, because she was too fat, too loud, too much. She stared at the bar, her cheeks burning with humiliation, wishing the floor would simply open up and swallow her whole. Up in the VIP booth, Vincent's blood ran ice cold. He didn't need to hear the conversation to know exactly what was happening. He saw the way the man leaned over her, the arrogant smirk on his face, and the way Clara seemed to shrink into herself, trying to make her large body as small as possible. The protective instinct that had been simmering inside Vincent suddenly boiled over into lethal rage. Boss Leo asked nervously, noticing the sudden shift in the room's temperature as Vincent stood up abruptly. Vincent didn't answer. He adjusted his cuffs, his face an emotionless mask of impending violence, and walked out the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite. He descended the spiral staircase, slowly, his presence parting the crowded dance floor, like Moses parting the Red Sea. The locals who recognized the Moretti boss quickly averted their eyes, holding their breath as the apex predator of Chicago stepped into their midst. Down at the bar, the drunken man reached out, wrapping his hand forcefully around Clara's wrist. I said, "Let me buy you a drink." Chubby. "Let go of me," Clara whispered, her voice shaking with fear and intoxication. Before the man could respond, a large, impeccably manicured hand clamped down onto his shoulder. The grip was paralyzing, digging deep into the man's collarbone with bone-crushing force. "I believe the lady asked you to let go of her," a deep, chilling voice murmured. The drunk man spun around, ready to throw a punch, but the words died in his throat the moment he looked into Vincent Moretti's dead, slate-grey eyes. The sheer aura of danger radiating from Vincent was suffocating. He didn't have to raise his voice. His tailored suit, his imposing height, and the two massive men in dark coats who had silently materialized behind him told the man exactly who he was dealing with. "I was just leaving," the man stammered, his face draining of all color. "You were." Vincent agreed softly, releasing the man's shoulder. "If I ever see your face in this city again, I'll have my men break both of your legs." "Now walk." The man stumbled backward, practically tripping over his own feet as he sprinted for the exit. Clara sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the terrifying, ridiculously handsome stranger who had just saved her. Vincent turned his attention to her, the lethal coldness in his eyes melting instantly into something entirely different, something warm, dark, and possessive. "Are you all right, Vincent?" asked his voice, softening, as he slid into the stool the drunk had just vacated. "Yes. Thank you," Clara stammered, pulling her wrist against her chest. She felt wildly out of place next to him. He looked like a billionaire, flawless and dangerous, while she was a heartbroken, overweight auditor with mascara running down her face. "You really didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Vincent said simply. He signaled the bartender. "A glass of Macallan 18 for the lady. And some water." He looked back at Clara, his gaze sweeping over her face. "I'm Vincent." "Clara," she whispered, mesmerized by the intensity of his stare. He wasn't looking at her the way men usually did, with pity or dismissal. He was looking at her as if she were the only woman in the entire room. "Why is a woman like you drinking whiskey and crying alone on a Tuesday night, Clara Vincent?" asked gently, his eyes mapping the soft contours of her face. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the exhaustion of holding it in for months. But the dam finally broke. Clara found herself spilling everything to this gorgeous stranger. She told him about her dead-end job at Deloitte, the crushing debt, her insecurities about her weight, and the man who had destroyed her. He took everything. Clara sobbed quietly, taking a sip of the expensive scotch Vincent had bought her. "He made me believe he loved me. He loved my body, my mind. But he just wanted my credit score. Now he's gone and I'm drowning." Vincent reached out his warm thumb, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity straight through Clara's spine. "What was his name?" Vincent asked quietly. "Brandon. Brandon Pierce." Clara choked out, staring down at her lap. Vincent's hand stilled on her cheek. The air in his lungs vanished. Brandon Pierce. Vincent knew exactly who Brandon Pierce was. 3 weeks ago, Brandon Pierce had borrowed $2 million from the Moretti syndicate to fund a ghost tech company using falsified bank records. When it was time to pay the first installment, Brandon had vanished. Vincent had already put a hit out on him. Brandon Pierce was a dead man walking. Vincent looked at the soft, heartbroken woman sitting beside him. She had no idea she was sitting next to the head of the Mafia. She had no idea her ex-boyfriend had stolen from the most dangerous man in the Midwest. The universe had just dropped Brandon Pierce's biggest victim right into Vincent's lap as the perfect leverage. But as Vincent looked at Clara's trembling lips and the vulnerable curve of her waist, he realized leverage was the last thing on his mind. He didn't want to use Clara to find Brandon. He wanted to protect her. And then he was going to make Brandon Pierce suffer in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating, as Vincent processed the name. Brandon Pierce. The absolute audacity of the universe to drop this specific woman right next to him at the exact moment his men were turning Chicago upside down, looking for that exact miserable coward. Vincent's jaw tightened, the muscles ticking beneath his jawline. The man who had humiliated this beautiful, vulnerable woman sitting beside him was the very same man who had stolen $2 million from the Moretti syndicate. It was a coincidence so astronomical, it felt like divine intervention. Vincent looked at Clara, his slate-grey eyes softening as he took in her tear-stained face. She sat hunched, her thick arms wrapped defensively around her plush middle, clearly expecting him to laugh at her pathetic story or simply walk away. That was what she was used to, he realized with a pang of unfamiliar fury. She was used to being discarded. Clara. Vincent started his voice, a low, soothing rumble over the smooth jazz playing in the background of the velvet room. I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to pay a single dime of that $150,000, and Brandon Pierce is never going to hurt you again. She let out a wet, bitter laugh, shaking her head. The movement made her dark, messy waves fall over her shoulders. You're very sweet, Vincent. Really you are. But you don't understand. Chase Bank doesn't care about my broken heart. Cushman and Wakefield doesn't care that my ex-boyfriend is a con artist. The contracts have my signature on them. It's my debt, my ruined life. I am a man who solves problems for a living, Vincent replied smoothly, leaning closer so his shoulder brushed against hers. The heat radiating from his large frame made Clara's breath hitch. I specialize in debt recovery and financial restructuring. Consider it fate that I sat down next to you tonight. Clara looked at him, really looked at him this time. He was wearing a custom Brioni suit that probably cost more than her car. His watch was a Patek Philippe, gleaming subtly in the dim lighting. He exuded wealth power and an unmistakable aura of danger. He didn't look like a financial consultant. He looked like a king who conquered nations. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't know me. I'm a mess. I'm broke. I'm overweight, and I cry in bars." Vincent reached out his long fingers, gently grasping her chin and tilting her face up, so she was forced to look into his eyes. "You are beautiful," he stated, the absolute conviction in his tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Your curves are perfect. Your mind is clearly brilliant if you work for Deloitte. Brandon Pierce didn't leave you because you weren't enough, Clara. He ran away because he is a coward and a thief. And as for why I want to help you, let's just say I have a personal aversion to men who exploit innocent people." Before Clara could process the sheer intensity of his compliment, a wave of sheer exhaustion crashed over her. The adrenaline of the confrontation with the drunk, mixed with the whiskey and the heavy emotional toll of the night, finally caught up to her. She swayed on the bar stool, her vision blurring at the edges. Vincent caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her thick waist, easily supporting her weight. She felt soft and warm against him, fitting perfectly into his chest. "Leo." Vincent snapped his voice, instantly dropping the gentle tone he had used with Clara, shifting back to the icy command of a syndicate boss. His underboss materialized from the shadows in less than 3 seconds. "Yes, boss. Bring the car around to the private alley exit." "Now," Vincent ordered. He looked down at Clara, whose eyes were fluttering shut, her cheek resting against his lapel. "I'm getting you out of here, Clara. You're safe now." Within minutes, they were sliding into the cavernous back seat of a black, armor-plated Mercedes Maybach. The city lights of Chicago blurred past the tinted windows, reflecting off the wet pavement of Michigan Avenue. Clara was half asleep, nestled securely in the crook of Vincent's arm. He held her with a fierce, possessive grip, his mind spinning with violent calculations. He couldn't take her back to her apartment. If Brandon was desperate and stealing from the Mafia meant he was definitely desperate, he might try to crawl back to Clara, to use her again, or hide out at her place. Vincent would not let that happen. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked, keeping his eyes firmly on the road ahead. "The Ritz-Carlton residences, the private penthouse," Vincent commanded. Leo, sitting in the passenger seat, turned his head slightly, his eyes wide with shock. "Boss, the penthouse? Are you sure we haven't vetted her? She could be. She is exactly who she says she is." "Leo." Vincent interrupted his voice, cutting through the car like a steel blade. "I want a security detail on the penthouse floor 24 hours a day. Nobody goes in or out without my explicit permission. And Leo..." "Yeah, boss. Pull all the files we have on Brandon Pierce's associates. Check his phone, pings, his credit card transactions, everything. He has 150,000 of her money and 2 million of mine. I want him found by tomorrow." Vincent looked down at the sleeping woman in his arms. She was breathing softly, her full lips parted slightly, her thick thighs resting heavily against his leg. For years, Vincent had been completely consumed by the syndicate, by the violence, the territory wars, and the relentless pursuit of power. He had built a fortress around his heart, letting no one in. Yet in a matter of hours, this broken, full-figured auditor had bypassed every single one of his defenses without even trying. He was going to get her money back. He was going to rebuild her shattered confidence. And then he was going to show her exactly what happened to monsters like Brandon Pierce when they stepped into the territory of a much bigger, much darker predator. The web was tangled, but Vincent held every single string. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gold Coast penthouse, painting the sprawling luxury apartment in warm, golden hues. Clara shifted on the massive king-sized bed, groaning as a dull headache throbbed behind her temples. The sheets beneath her were softer than anything she had ever felt, holding a thread count that screamed impossible wealth. She blinked her eyes open, her memory slowly piecing together the fragmented events of the previous night. The speakeasy, the drunk man, Vincent. The crushing realization that a gorgeous, powerful billionaire had essentially carried her out of a bar and brought her here. Clara sat up, clutching the silk duvet to her chest, her heart hammering. She was wearing one of Vincent's oversized dress shirts, the expensive cotton draping comfortably over her heavy curves, buttoned up entirely. He hadn't touched her inappropriately. He had just made sure she was safe. She looked around the room, taking in the minimalist Italian furniture, the abstract artwork that likely cost more than her entire college tuition, and the breathtaking panoramic view of Lake Michigan. "Good morning," a deep voice resonated from the doorway. Clara jumped, pulling the duvet tighter. Vincent stood leaning against the doorframe, wearing dark, tailored trousers and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms lightly dusted with dark hair. He was holding a silver tray with a steaming mug of coffee and a glass of water with 2 aspirin on the side. "I shouldn't be here," Clara stammered, feeling heat rush to her cheeks. She was incredibly self-conscious of her messy hair, her makeup-free face, and the undeniable bulk of her body hidden beneath his shirt. "I don't even know you. I let a total stranger bring me to his apartment. I'm an idiot." Vincent walked over, setting the tray on the nightstand. His movements were incredibly smooth, almost predatory in their grace. "You aren't an idiot, Clara. You were exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely vulnerable. I offered you a safe harbor, and you took it. Drink the water, take the pills." She obeyed blindly, swallowing the aspirin and taking a long gulp of the water. The coolness helped ground her racing thoughts. "Where are we?" "My home, the Ritz-Carlton Residences," Vincent replied, taking a seat on the edge of the mattress. He didn't seem bothered by her size at all. In fact, his gaze swept over her form with a quiet, smouldering appreciation that made her toes curl. "Your clothes have been dry cleaned and are hanging in the bathroom, but right now we need to talk about your situation." Clara sighed, staring down at her lap. "My situation is that I'm bankrupt. I need to leave Vincent. I have to go beg the partners at Deloitte not to fire me, because my credit score is about to hit rock bottom." "You aren't going to work today," Vincent stated calmly, "and you aren't going back to your apartment." Clara frowned, a spike of irritation breaking through her anxiety. "Excuse me, you don't get to tell me what to do. You bought me a drink, you didn't buy my life." Vincent actually smiled at that, a dark, devastating smirk that completely transformed his face. "I like your fire. But listen to me, Clara. Brandon Pierce didn't just steal from you. He stole from some very dangerous people in this city, people who are currently looking for him. If they find out you co-signed his loans, they might come looking for you." Clara's blood ran cold. "Dangerous people? What do you mean, like loan sharks?" "Something like that." Vincent lied smoothly, though the truth was far more terrifying. "I own a firm that tracks down missing assets. I've been looking for Brandon for 3 weeks. Finding you was a stroke of luck, but it also puts you in the crosshairs. You need to stay here under my protection until I resolve this." Before Clara could process the magnitude of what he was saying, her cell phone, which was sitting on the nightstand next to the coffee, buzzed aggressively. The screen lit up, displaying a blocked caller ID. Clara froze, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Vincent's eyes narrowed. He picked up the phone, sliding his thumb over the screen to answer it, and hit the speaker button before holding it out between them. "Clara!" A panicked, breathless voice crackled through the speaker. Clara gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. It was Brandon. "Clara, baby, please tell me you're there." Brandon begged, his voice laced with pure terror. I messed up so badly. I need your help." Vincent's expression instantly turned to pure ice, his grey eyes darkening into an abyss of promised violence. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Clara to stay quiet and listen. "I know I took the money." Brandon continued, frantically, completely unaware that his worst nightmare was listening on the other end of the line. "But I have a plan to fix it. I just need you to do me one last favor. I need you to wire the remaining 20,000 from your 401k to an offshore account. If you do this, I promise I'll come back, and we can run away together. They're going to kill me, Clara. The Moretti family is going to kill me if I don't pay them back by tomorrow." Clara's heart stopped beating. The Moretti family. She didn't know much about the criminal underworld, but even she had heard whispers of the Moretti Syndicate, the most ruthless, bloodthirsty mafia family in Chicago. Brandon hadn't just taken a bad business loan. He had stolen from the mob. "Clara, please," Brandon sobbed. "Meet me at the old Cicero warehouse at midnight. Just bring the wire transfer confirmation. You're the only one who can save me. I know you still love me." Vincent ended the call with a sharp tap of his finger, cutting off Brandon's pathetic pleas. The silence in the luxury bedroom was absolutely deafening. Clara was trembling violently, tears of pure horror spilling over her cheeks. "He stole from the Mafia," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He wants me to go to a warehouse to meet him. They'll kill me too." Vincent set the phone down gently. He reached out his large hands, cupping her thick, soft cheeks, forcing her to look into his eyes. There was no fear in his gaze, only a calm, terrifying certainty. "Nobody is going to kill you, Clara," Vincent said softly, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Brandon made a fatal mistake calling you. He thought he could use your gentle heart one last time." "What are we going to do?" she cried, leaning into his touch, despite her panic. Vincent stood up, adjusting his cuffs with chilling precision. "You are going to stay exactly where you are and eat breakfast. I am going to take a drive to the Cicero warehouse." He looked down at her, the mask of the benevolent businessman completely shattering to reveal the ruthless mob boss underneath. "I told you I was going to fix your debt, Clara, and the Moretti family always collects." Midnight blanketed the abandoned Cicero warehouse district in a heavy, oppressive darkness, broken only by the intermittent amber glow of flickering street lamps. The biting Chicago wind howled off the lake, rattling the loose corrugated metal siding of the decaying structures. Inside the largest warehouse, dust danced in the pale moonlight that filtered through the shattered skylights. Brandon Pierce paced frantically in the center of the empty concrete floor, his expensive designer coat doing nothing to stop the violent shivering racking his lean frame. He kept checking the cracked screen of his phone, desperate for a message from Clara. He had played her perfectly for months, utilizing her insecurities and her desperate need for validation to drain her accounts. He was entirely confident she would show up tonight, blindingly loyal and foolish enough to drain her retirement fund just to save his skin. Headlights suddenly swept across the cracked concrete outside, illuminating the rusted loading dock doors. Brandon stopped pacing, a relieved, arrogant smirk momentarily replacing the sheer terror on his face. He quickly smoothed his hair, practicing the pathetic, pleading expression he knew always worked on her. He expected to see Clara's dented Honda Civic pull into the lot. Instead, the heavy hum of a V12 engine vibrated through the floorboards. The rolling doors groaned in protest as they were hauled upward by unseen hands, revealing the imposing armor-plated silhouette of a black Mercedes Maybach. Brandon's arrogant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a cold knot of dread sitting heavy in his stomach. The back door of the Maybach clicked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out into the damp night air. It wasn't Clara. It was a man dressed in a bespoke charcoal overcoat, his presence radiating an absolute suffocating authority. Flanking him were four massive men in dark suits, their hands resting ominously inside their jackets. Brandon took a shaky step backward, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Where is Clara?" Brandon stammered, his voice cracking, as he tried to maintain a facade of bravado. "I told her to come alone. Who the hell are you?" Vincent Moretti walked slowly into the warehouse, his footsteps echoing like a judge's gavel against the concrete. He stopped 10 feet away from Brandon, his slate-gray eyes sweeping over the trembling con artist with profound disgust. "Clara is currently sleeping in a silk bed overlooking Lake Michigan, completely safe from parasites like you." Vincent said, his voice a low, lethal purr that carried effortlessly in the cavernous space. "She won't be coming tonight, Brandon, or ever again." Brandon swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits, only to find Leo and 3 other enforcers blocking every possible escape route. "I don't know what she told you, man, but this is a misunderstanding. I just need to talk to her. We have a financial arrangement." "Oh, I am fully aware of your financial arrangements," Vincent replied smoothly, pulling a pair of black leather gloves from his pocket and slowly pulling them onto his hands. I know all about the forged Chase Bank documents. I know about the maxed-out credit cards. I know you left a sweet, vulnerable woman with $150,000 of your debt while you ran off to play pretend with money that didn't belong to you. She signed those papers willingly. Brandon shouted, panic elevating his pitch. She's a fat, desperate auditor who was just thrilled a guy like me gave her the time of day. She knew what she was doing. Look, just let me see her and I'll get the money to pay back. He trailed off, finally looking closely at the man standing before him. The icy grey eyes, the aristocratic jawline, the terrifying stillness. The whispers of the Chicago underworld suddenly slammed into Brandon's mind. You! Brandon choked out all the blood completely draining from his face. You're Vincent Moretti. And you are $2 million in debt to my family, Vincent confirmed softly, taking another step forward. The air in the warehouse seemed to freeze. You stole from my syndicate, Brandon. And then, in a display of truly spectacular stupidity, you stole from a woman that I have decided belongs under my protection. You made her cry. You made her feel worthless. I take a very personal offense to both of those infractions. Please! Brandon begged, dropping abruptly to his knees on the filthy concrete. Tears of genuine pathetic terror streamed down his face. Please, Mr. Moretti. I have the money. I hid it in an offshore account in the Caymans. I can wire it all back to you right now. Just let me live. I'll give you everything, I swear to God. Vincent stared down at the groveling man, his expression completely devoid of mercy. He snapped his fingers. Leo stepped forward, carrying a sleek silver laptop, which he forcefully shoved into Brandon's trembling hands. Log in, Vincent commanded. First, you are going to wire exactly $150,000 directly to Chase Bank, paying off the loan in Clara's name. Then you are going to transfer the remaining balance of the $2 million back to my syndicate's holding account. Brandon's fingers shook violently as he opened the laptop, scrambling to type in his credentials. He desperately navigated the banking portals, transferring the stolen funds, just as Vincent ordered. It's done. It's done, see? Brandon sobbed, turning the screen toward Vincent. The debt is clear. Clara is free. You have your money back. We're square right. Please tell me we're square. Vincent glanced at the screen confirming the transfers. He nodded slowly to Leo, who firmly shut the laptop and stepped back. Clara's debt is cleared, Vincent agreed, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. But you see, Brandon, the money was only a small part of the problem. The real issue is the disrespect. You humiliated a woman I value. You insulted her body, her mind, and her trust. I'm sorry, I'll apologize to her. I'll tell her she's beautiful. I'll tell her anything, Brandon shrieked, crawling backward, as Vincent's enforcers began to close the circle around him. She doesn't need your apologies because she already knows she is beautiful, Vincent said, coldly, turning his back on the pathetic creature sobbing on the floor. He began walking back toward the idling Maybach. She doesn't need to hear another word from you ever again. Wait, where are you going? You said we were square, Brandon screamed, scrambling to get up before Leo planted a heavy steel-toed boot firmly into his chest, pinning him to the floor. Vincent paused at the door of his car, looking back over his shoulder. The moonlight caught the lethal, unforgiving edge of his profile. I said Clara's debt was cleared. I never said you were forgiven. Leo, take him to the docks. Make sure he understands the exact price of stealing from the Moretti family. As the heavy warehouse door slammed shut behind the Maybach, cutting off Brandon's final desperate screams, Vincent loosened his tie. The toll had been collected. Now he had to return to the penthouse and face the one woman who had the power to make the king of the Chicago underworld completely lose his mind. Sleep completely eluded Clara. She paced the length of the sprawling moonlit penthouse, her bare feet sinking into the plush Persian rugs. The silence of the luxury apartment was maddening, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. Vincent had been gone for 2 hours. 2 hours since Brandon's panicked phone call. 2 hours since this mysterious, impossibly handsome billionaire had promised to fix everything. Unable to stand the suspense any longer, Clara had retrieved her phone from the nightstand. Sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, her heavy thighs pressed tightly together, she opened a browser and typed a single name into the search bar: Moretti Family Chicago. The search results loaded instantly, and Clara's breath completely hitched in her throat. Rows upon rows of news articles, FBI press releases, and investigative journalism pieces flooded her screen. The Moretti Syndicate, Chicago's untouchable crime family. Vincent Moretti, the ruthless heir to an underworld empire. She clicked on the Images tab, her hands shaking violently. There he was. Photographs of Vincent leaving federal courthouses, completely unbothered pictures of him attending high society galas, flanked by dangerous-looking men, and diagrams mapping out his alleged control over the city's illegal gambling and smuggling rings. The man who had gently wiped her tears, who had bought her expensive scotch, who had carried her sleeping, overweight body into his penthouse, was a Mafia boss, the most feared man in the Midwest. Clara dropped the phone onto the glass coffee table as if it had burned her. Panic, thick and suffocating, rose in her chest. She was locked in the penthouse of a mobster. Brandon hadn't just stolen from dangerous loan sharks. He had stolen from a man who commanded a literal army of killers. And now she was sitting in that man's living room wearing his shirt. The quiet hum of the private elevator opening shattered the silence. Clara leapt up, retreating behind the sofa, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Vincent stepped into the dimly lit living room, shrugging off his heavy charcoal overcoat. He looked impeccably composed, not a single hair out of place, but there was a dark, dangerous energy lingering around him, a heavy scent of cold wind and something metallic. He paused, his sharp eyes instantly finding her cowering behind the furniture. He didn't miss the glowing screen of her phone resting on the glass table. "You're awake," Vincent noted softly, his voice devoid of the lethal edge he had used at the warehouse. He slowly unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling them up to reveal his muscular forearms. "You're Vincent Moretti," Clara blurted out, her voice trembling violently. She clutched the oversized shirt tightly around her thick waist, suddenly feeling incredibly exposed. "You're the head of the Mafia, the cartel, the syndicate, whatever they call it." Vincent didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He simply walked over to the sprawling wet bar, poured himself a glass of neat whiskey, and turned to face her. "I am. And judging by the absolute terror on your face, I assume you've spent the last hour reading the sensationalized garbage the Chicago Tribune prints about me." "Is it garbage?" Clara challenged, tears of fear springing to her eyes. "Brandon called you. He was terrified. He said your family was going to kill him. Did you hurt him?" Vincent took a slow sip of his drink, his slate-grey eyes locking onto hers with a hypnotic intensity. "Brandon Pierce is no longer a problem. He has officially wired the full $150,000 directly to Chase Bank. The loan in your name is entirely paid off, Clara. You are free of your debt. You will never see or hear from him again." Clara gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been destroying her life for months was suddenly miraculously gone. But the relief was instantly overshadowed by the chilling realization of how it had been accomplished. "What did you do to him, Vincent? You killed him, didn't you?" "I secured your financial freedom," Vincent corrected, smoothly setting his glass down and slowly crossing the room toward her. Clara instinctively took a step back, but her back hit the floor-to-ceiling window. She was trapped. What happens to men who steal from my family is not your concern. Your concern is that you are safe, your credit is restored, and the man who broke your heart has paid for his sins. He stopped mere inches from her, his towering frame completely eclipsing her vision. She should be terrified. She should be screaming for the police. But as she looked up into his eyes, she didn't see a cold-blooded killer. She saw a fierce, unyielding protector. "Why?" Clara whispered, her voice breaking. Tears spilled down her flushed cheeks. "Why would you do all this for me? I'm nobody. I'm just a fat, broken accountant who was stupid enough to get conned. You could have any supermodel in this city. Why do you care what happens to me?" Vincent's jaw clenched. He reached out his large, warm hands, gently gripping her thick hips, entirely unbothered by her size. In fact, his fingers pressed possessively into her soft curves, holding her firmly in place. "Stop insulting yourself," he commanded, his voice, a low, rough growl that sent shivers straight to her core. "Stop echoing the words of a dead man. You think I want a starving, hollow socialite? I look at you, Clara, and I see a woman with a brilliant mind, a beautiful, lush body, and a heart so full of loyalty it blinded you." Clara sobbed, shaking her head, trying to deny the intoxicating validation he was pouring over her battered self-esteem. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Vincent countered fiercely, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "I know that when you walked into that bar, completely shattered, you eclipsed every other person in the room. I know that I have spent my entire life building an empire of violence, and the only thing I want to use it for right now is to build a fortress around you." He slowly dragged his thumb across her lower lip, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "You aren't a hostage here, Clara. The door is unlocked. Your debt is cleared. You can walk out right now and go back to your quiet, safe life." "I won't stop you." He paused, his breath ghosting over her lips, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "But I am a very selfish man, and I am asking you to stay." Clara stood frozen against the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window, the bustling lights of the Chicago skyline completely blurring behind her. Vincent's plea hung heavily in the quiet space of the penthouse. He was a monster to the outside world, a man who dealt in violence and blood. Yet here he was, stripping away every ounce of his armor, just to ask her to stay. She looked down at his large hands, resting firmly, reverently on her heavy hips. For the first time in her 28 years of life, a man was not asking her to shrink to diet or to change. He was begging her to remain exactly as she was. "You're a dangerous man," Clara whispered, her breath catching, as his thumbs began to slowly stroke the soft curves of her waist. "Only to those who try to hurt you." Vincent murmured, his slate-grey eyes burning with an intense, unwavering devotion. "To you, Clara, I am whatever you need me to be. A shield, a weapon, a partner." The last word shattered the final remnants of her hesitation. Clara reached up, her thick fingers tangling into the crisp collar of his white dress shirt. She pulled him down, closing the small distance between them, and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was explosive, a desperate collision of two entirely different worlds. Vincent groaned, a deep, guttural sound of pure victory, as his arms wrapped entirely around her lush figure, lifting her slightly off the ground. He kissed her with the same ruthless precision he used to rule the underworld, possessive, overwhelming, and entirely consuming. Clara didn't pull away. She melted into his heat, finally letting the broken, insecure auditor die and allowing the woman Vincent saw in her to take her first breath. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a dazzling sea of glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the absolute elite of Chicago's high society. The annual Winter Charity Gala was the most exclusive event of the season, a place where billionaires, politicians, and socialites gathered to parade their wealth. Clara stood near a towering ice sculpture, completely holding court. She was no longer the crying, desperate woman drowning her sorrows in cheap whiskey at a dive bar. She wore a custom emerald green gown by Oscar de la Renta that hugged every single one of her plus-size curves with unapologetic glamour. A diamond Bulgari necklace rested against her collarbone, a quiet, breathtaking testament to the man standing just a few feet away, watching her with a predatory pride. Clara Jenkins, is that you?" Clara turned gracefully, her manicured hand resting lightly on her hip. Standing before her was Richard Lawson, a senior partner at Deloitte, and her former boss. Richard was a notoriously cruel man who had spent years passing Clara over for promotions, frequently making subtle, degrading comments about her weight and her lack of corporate image. Well, Richard's eyes bulged as he took in her stunning appearance, the undeniable aura of power radiating from her, and the staggering wealth draped around her neck. I hardly recognized you," Richard stammered, his trademark arrogance faltering. "You left the firm so abruptly. We heard rumors you had a financial meltdown, yet here you are at a $10,000 a plate dinner." He sneered slightly, unable to help himself. "Who did you have to con to get an invitation, Clara? Or did you finally find a sugar daddy willing to overlook your proportions?" Before Clara could even formulate a response, the temperature in the ballroom seemed to plummet. The low hum of conversation nearby abruptly ceased, as the crowd parted, instinctively making way for the apex predator entering their orbit. Vincent Moretti slid his arm possessively around Clara's thick waist, pulling her softly against his tailored tuxedo. "Is there a problem here, amore?" Vincent asked, his voice a smooth, lethal purr. Richard Lawson froze, the color violently draining from his face as he recognized the man holding Clara. The Moretti boss was an urban legend that terrified even the most corrupt corporate executives. "No problem, Vincent," Clara replied, her voice steady and dripping with a newfound icy confidence. She looked Richard dead in the eye, feeling absolutely no fear. "Richard was just leaving. Weren't you, Richard?" Mr. Moretti." Richard choked out sweat, completely beading on his forehead. "I meant no disrespect. I was just checking in on a former employee." "Clara doesn't work for you anymore," Vincent stated coldly, his grey eyes locking onto the trembling partner. "In fact, she recently acquired the majority holding in the commercial real estate firm that owns your corporate headquarters. If I ever hear that you spoke to my fiancé with anything less than absolute reverence, I will have your firm evicted onto the street by morning, and then I will make things truly unpleasant for you." Richard didn't say another word. He practically scrambled backward, fleeing the ballroom as fast as his legs could carry him. Clara looked up at Vincent, a radiant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. He hadn't fought her battle for her. He had simply stood beside her, reminding the world of the power she now wielded. She reached up gently, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Did you really buy my old office building?" She whispered, her eyes dancing with amusement. "I bought the entire block," Vincent corrected smoothly, leaning down to press a soft kiss against her full lips. "I told you, Clara. I am a man who solves problems, and my favorite problem to solve is anyone who thinks you are anything less than a queen." Clara leaned her head against his chest, the heavy, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her. She had lost her savings, her career, and her naive innocence to a con artist. But in the ashes of her absolute ruin, she had found a dark, dangerous sanctuary. She was a mafia boss's greatest weakness, his ultimate obsession, and she had never felt more beautiful. Heartbreak and betrayal pushed Clara to the absolute edge, but sometimes our darkest moments lead us to the exact place we were always meant to be. She thought her size and her trusting nature were her biggest flaws, yet they were the exact reasons a ruthless king of the underworld deemed her worthy of his empire. True love often hides in the most dangerous, unexpected shadows, waiting to build a fortress around you. If you loved Clara and Vincent's thrilling, twisted mafia romance, please drop a like, share this dramatic story with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the video for more intense, romantic audio stories.